Title: The Lawn is Always Greener. Consider the American suburb, that great machine for converting wilderness into contentment, roughness into lawn, difference into sameness. For a century, it has promised safety, order, and the deep animal comfort of knowing your neighbor's grass is cut to precisely the same height as yours. Robert Calloway, 45, believed in that promise the way a man believes in the foundation beneath his house without examining it, without needing to, right up until the moment he felt it shift. Tonight, Mr. Calloway will learn something about order, specifically who profits from it, and what they had to destroy to sell it to him. The drones arrived on a Tuesday, which Robert thought was fitting. Tuesday was the most forgettable day of the week, no ceremony to it, no anticipation. Things that arrived on Tuesdays were things that were simply going to exist, whether you celebrated them or not. He was standing in his driveway with his coffee, when the first one drifted over the Hendersons' Colonial across the street, a matte gray disc the size of a dinner plate, nearly silent, its undercarriage pulsing with a slow amber light. Then another, then 6 more, spreading through the morning air above Sycamore Glen like seeds from some enormous dandelion. They arranged themselves with a precision that felt almost ceremonial, each one staking out a position equidistant from the next, and then they simply hovered there, watching. Robert had voted for them. He wanted to be clear with himself about that. The referendum had gone out through the Sycamore Glen community app 3 months earlier. Had anyone said no? He couldn't remember anyone saying no. The pitch had been elegant. Autonomous neighborhood assurance drones, manufactured by a company called Hearthstone Systems, would patrol the community 24 hours a day, enforcing the HOA aesthetic guidelines that everyone agreed to when they signed their mortgage documents, and that roughly no one had ever meaningfully enforced. The drones would ensure lawns were cut, paint was fresh, cars were parked in garages by 9 in the evening. They would flag violations, and here was the part that made Robert feel something warm and uncomplicated. They could assess minor fines automatically, charge to the homeowner's Hearthstone account, no human confrontation required. No more leaving a passive-aggressive note on Dave Kowalski's door about his peeling fascia boards. The drone would handle it. Politely. Algorithmically. Robert had voted yes in the time it took to finish his morning yogurt. So had, apparently, 91% of Sycamore Glen. Now he stood watching his new neighbors hover, and he felt something he recognized from the first days after his daughters were born, a proprietary satisfaction, the sense of a problem preemptively solved. The neighborhood did look better. He was sure of that, at least in October. Sycamore Glen occupied 43 acres of what had been soybean fields until 2019, when Hearthstone's parent company, a real estate development arm called Parallax Properties, had broken ground on what they marketed as Americana Reimagined. The aesthetic was deliberate and specific. Craftsman bungalows and colonials with deep front porches, sidewalks wide enough for children to ride bikes side by side, street lamps styled after 1950s gaslights. The grocery store at the community's edge had a painted marquee sign. The park at the center had a bandstand. The whole effect was of a town that had always been here, that had grown up slowly and honestly, which of course it hadn't. It had been laid out in a weekend by landscape architects in Columbus. Robert had moved here from Cleveland 3 years ago after his company went remote, and his wife, Diane, said she wanted a yard and a school district where the teachers returned your calls. Their daughters, Petra and Sophie, were 11 and 8 respectively, and had adapted to Sycamore Glen with the liquid ease children bring to everything, absorbing new friends and a new bedroom and a new bus stop, as if these things had always been true. Robert had adapted more slowly, but the neighborhood had helped. There was something about it. A grammar he understood. A legibility. You could see the whole street from your porch and know what kind of place it was. He needed that, he realized. After Cleveland, after years of commuting through neighborhoods where every block was a different decade colliding with itself, he needed to live somewhere that had already decided what it was. The drones made it more itself. By November, the Kowalski fascia boards were freshly painted. Ivory, as specified in the HOA guidelines, Section 4, Subsection B. The nuance basketball hoop, which had migrated to the front driveway sometime over the summer, was back in the side yard. 3 houses had new roofs. The whole street sat straight and tended and quietly gleaming under the autumn light. And when Robert walked his daughters to the bus stop in the mornings, he noticed that other parents walked with something slightly different in their posture, a lightness, he thought, though he couldn't have said exactly why. He told Diane the drones were the best thing that had happened to the neighborhood. She gave him the look she gave him when she was keeping a thought to herself. which he did not examine too closely. The first time a drone stopped him, he was coming home from a run. It was a Saturday in early December, cold enough that he could see his breath, and he'd taken the long route through the back streets, past the wetland preserve Parallax had left at the neighborhood's eastern edge as a tax accommodation. He was wearing his old Cleveland Browns hoodie, the one with the cracked lettering and the fraying cuffs because it was warm and he was running, and he hadn't thought about it. He came around the corner onto Sycamore Drive and felt the air change slightly above him, a displacement, and then one of the drones descended to a point roughly 6 feet in front of his face and stopped. Its amber light shifted to a pale, almost clinical white. A speaker in its undercarriage, he hadn't known they had speakers, emitted a tone that managed to be both gentle and absolute. "Good morning, Mr. Calloway. A quick community reminder. The Sycamore Glen Aesthetic Guidelines, Section 7, encourage residents to maintain a tidy, well-presented appearance in shared community spaces, including public sidewalks and streets. The garment you're wearing is showing significant wear. Hearthstone's community store has some wonderful options for activewear that align with neighborhood standards."
Have a great run?
The white light returned to amber. The drone lifted smoothly and rejoined its circuit. Robert stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing steam into the cold air. His first feeling was embarrassment, which surprised him. His second was something murkier, and he walked home with it sitting in his chest like a swallowed stone, turning it over, not yet ready to name it. He didn't throw the hoodie away. He put it in the bottom of his gym bag and wore it only inside the house, which he told himself was a practical choice. December became January, and January had a quality Robert associated with the feeling just before you realize you're coming down with something. Sycamore Glen continued to gleam. The holiday decorations had been permitted within a specific range. White lights only, no inflatables, no yard displays larger than 18 inches. And the street had looked, he admitted, genuinely beautiful, like a photograph of a Christmas card. Petra had complained that she wanted the inflatable snowman they'd had in Cleveland, the one that played a tinny version of Frosty when you walked past it. He'd told her the new lights were more elegant. She'd looked at him the way 11-year-olds look at people who have said something that made complete sense to them once, and now sounds like a small, sad confession. He was working from his home office on a Thursday afternoon, quarterly estimates, nothing urgent, when he heard Sophie shouting in the backyard. Not frightened shouting, playing shouting, the kind that has velocity and repetition to it, a game with rules. He looked out the window. She and the Okonkwo girl from 4 doors down, Maya, had strung a rope between 2 trees and were doing something involving a basketball and a system of rules he couldn't follow from a distance. Something they had clearly invented together over several days, something that required the rope and the ball and a particular pattern of movement around a bucket they dragged from the shed. A drone materialized above the fence. It descended slowly, its light shifting to white. "Good afternoon. A reminder that the Sycamore Glen backyard guidelines specify play equipment must be pre-approved through the community app. Unauthorized structures, including temporary rope installations, may affect neighborhood aesthetic continuity. This has been logged as a first notice. Please remove the rope installation at your earliest convenience. Thank you for helping keep Sycamore Glen beautiful." The girls stopped playing. Sophie looked up at the drone, then across at Maya, and something happened in her face, not anger, which Robert could have handled, but a kind of closing, like a door swinging shut. "It's okay," Maya said, already untying the rope from the tree. She said it the way children say it when they've already been taught that certain disappointments are simply the weather. Robert was at the back door by the time Sophie came inside. Her eyes were dry and her mouth was set, and she said, "Daddy? What are the drones for?" He said, "To keep things nice." She considered that. Nice for who? He didn't have an answer that didn't sound hollow when he rehearsed it in his head, so he said, "Go wash up, dinner's almost ready," and hated himself with a precision that surprised him. He started noticing other things. The drones responded to sound as well as sight. Late-night parties, or what passed for late-night parties in Sycamore Glen, which was to say wine on the Martinsons' porch after 10, a guitar someone was strumming softly in a backyard, would draw a drone within minutes, its white light a quiet declaration that the sound levels exceeded community guidelines. People dispersed. Robert began to notice that no one played music with their windows open. He noticed that the children played more quietly in the front yard than they used to, a specific, self-conscious quiet, the quiet of people who have learned they are being graded. He also noticed that he'd begun dressing with the drones in mind when he left the house, which he recognized as a new development in his character, and couldn't quite bring himself to examine directly. In February, he started talking to Phil Ostrowski, who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac and worked remotely for a logistics company, and had a habit of mowing his lawn in concentric circles rather than straight lines because, he said, it was the only outdoor creative expression his life currently offered. The drones had flagged him twice for the circles. The HOA guidelines specified parallel horizontal passes. Phil had complied. He'd also, in the 3 months since, developed a way of walking with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders slightly raised, a posture Robert recognized as belonging to people who are perpetually expecting to be corrected. "I Googled Hearthstone systems last week," Phil said. They were standing at the end of his driveway in the thin winter light, the kind of conversation that had to be outside because inside felt like it would make it more real. "Did you look at who owns them?" Robert hadn't. He said so. "Parallax Properties," Phil said. "Same company that built the neighborhood." Robert waited. "So the company that sold us the idea of the neighborhood," Phil said slowly, "is also the company that sold us the thing that enforces the idea of the neighborhood." He paused, "and charges us a monthly subscription for the enforcement." Robert hadn't thought about the monthly subscription in those terms. It came out of his Hearthstone account automatically, the same account he paid his HOA dues from, $47 a month per household, roughly the cost of a streaming service, invisible the way utilities become invisible. "That's just vertical integration," Robert said, and hated the way it sounded, the way he'd reached for it, the way you reach for an umbrella. Phil looked at him. "Sure," he said. The thing that broke it open was small, as these things always are. In March, a family moved in 3 houses down. The Cabreras, Rafael and Yolanda, 2 teenage sons, a grandmother who sat on the front porch most afternoons in a plastic lawn chair doing something with yarn crocheting. Robert thought, though he didn't know the word for it at the time. They were warm and loud in the specific way of families that have been warm and loud together for a long time, a particular music of overlapping voices that drifted down the street on mild evenings. The drones visited them with a frequency that Robert began tracking without fully admitting to himself that he was tracking it. Noise levels. A car parked 2 inches beyond the approved distance from the curb. Wind chimes on the porch, which apparently fell afoul of subsection 4C's prohibition on extraneous facade ornamentation. The grandmother's lawn chair, which the drone described as non-approved outdoor furniture in the front-facing zone. One afternoon in April, the first genuinely warm day, the kind that makes the entire preceding winter feel like a rumor, Robert watched from his porch as a drone descended toward the Cabreras' front yard, where the grandmother was sitting in her chair doing her yarn work, and he watched her look up at the drone, and he watched the particular expression she had, not fear, not anger, but a deep and weary recognition, the look of a person who has met this thing before in other shapes. She stood up, folded her chair, and carried it inside. The drone returned to its circuit. Robert sat on his porch for a long time after that. He went to the community app that night, the way he'd been meaning to for weeks, and he didn't look at the guidelines or the bulletin board or the schedule of upcoming sprinkler system inspections. He navigated to the terms of service. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and he read the terms of service, which was something he'd never done, which was something no one did, which was precisely why the terms of service was where you put things. It took 40 minutes and he had to read certain sections 3 times. Hearthstone systems collected behavioral data from drone observations, foot traffic patterns, social gathering frequency, noise levels, vehicle movement. This data was shared with Parallax Properties for purposes of community optimization and resident experience enhancement. It was also, and here was the sentence he read 4 times, each time with the sensation of the floor doing something unexpected, shared with a subsidiary of Parallax called Clarity Analytics Group, which provided urban environment consulting to developers planning future community. Robert sat back in his chair. Clarity Analytics Group. He searched it on a different window. It took 10 minutes of careful reading across 3 different sites before the picture assembled itself. Clarity Analytics Group had been founded in 2021, 2 years before Sycamore Glen broke ground. Its business model was consulting. It helped real estate developers identify and enter markets in transition, meaning neighborhoods where residents were experiencing elevated anxiety about crime, disorder, and community cohesion. It provided developers with demographic targeting tools and marketing strategy. Robert stared at the screen. He thought about Cleveland. He thought about the 5 years before they'd moved, the mounting accumulation of things that had felt like the neighborhood changing, deteriorating, the series of car break-ins over 6 months, the weeks when the streetlights were out and the city took forever to fix them. This summer, the park was closed for renovations and never quite reopened all the way. The rise and sudden virality of the next-door posts that described the neighborhood in terms of threat levels. The general sensation of a place becoming unsafe that had settled over their block like a change in air pressure. He thought about how that sensation had driven their decision to look at Sycamore Glen. He thought about how many of their neighbors in Cleveland had moved in the same period, and to where and why. He sat with his bourbon and his open laptop, and he thought about what it would mean, what it would specifically, technically mean if that sensation of deterioration had not been a natural process. If it had been a product, if Clarity Analytics Group, Parallax Properties, Hearthstone Systems had the capability to degrade a neighborhood's experience, broken streetlights, a statistical nudge in how crime was reported on community platforms, a carefully targeted social media current. Subtle, deniable, the kind of thing you'd call paranoid to even suggest, right up until you'd read the terms of service. He thought about what they sold you once they'd manufactured the problem, the solution, the gleaming, orderly, priced-out solution. He thought about the Cabreras' grandmother carrying her lawn chair inside. He poured the rest of the bourbon down the sink and went upstairs. Diane was reading in bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress, and she looked at him over her book with the expression that meant she'd been waiting. "You've been chewing on something," she said. "I think the chaos we ran away from," he said. "I think someone made it." She closed the book on her thumb to hold her place. She said, "I know." He stared at her. "You know? I suspected. Last fall, after the drone stopped Sophie." She paused. "After I noticed that every time someone on Nextdoor talked about leaving Sycamore Glen, the next week there'd be a spike in crime reports from wherever they said they were considering moving." She shrugged, a small, precise motion. "I didn't tell you because I knew you weren't ready to know." He thought about whether to be upset about that. He decided it would be the wrong emotion for the situation. What do we do?" he said. "That," she said, "is the actual question." He called a meeting through the community app, which in retrospect was either brave or foolish. He scheduled it as a neighborhood social gathering because he suspected correctly that scheduling a meeting titled, "I have read the terms of service and we need to talk," would alert something. 11 people showed up to his living room on a Wednesday evening, which was more than he expected and fewer than he needed. Phil Ostrowski was there. The Cabreras sent Raphael, who sat in the corner with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had been waiting for the white people to catch up. Marcus and Delanguiennes came, a woman named Joni from the far end of the development whom Robert had never met, who turned out to have a background in data privacy law and who listened to his account with a stillness that felt like it contained a great deal of velocity. He explained what he'd found. He read sections aloud. He watched faces move through a sequence he recognized: skepticism, impatience. Then the subtle change of expression that comes when a person stops arguing with the information and starts recognizing it. Rafael Cabrera didn't change expression at all. He'd arrived already recognizing it. "We can opt out," Joni said. She was looking at the terms of service on her own phone. Section 12, paragraph 4, any household can opt out of drone coverage by submitting a written request, 60-day processing period. She looked up. Of course, if you opt out, you're still subject to HOA enforcement through traditional channels, which means neighbor complaints, Phil said. Which means no enforcement unless someone actually bothers, Robert said. "What about the data?" Delanguin asked. "They've already collected it. They've already shared it." Joni did something with her mouth that communicated a complex legal reality in a single expression. "That's a different problem," she said. "They talked for 2 hours. What they came to wasn't a plan so much as a beginning of a plan, which Robert recognized as the honest version of most plans. They would submit the opt-out requests as a block, 11 households moving together, which created visibility, which made it harder to dismiss as an individual quirk. Joni would draft a letter to the state attorney general's office regarding the data sharing arrangement and its relationship to what she called, carefully, market conditioning practices. Raphael said he had a cousin who worked in investigative journalism for a regional outlet, and Robert said yes. When people were putting on their coats, Raphael stopped at the door. He looked at Robert with a directness that Robert received without flinching, which he considered a minor personal achievement. "You know they'll replace this," Raphael said, not accusingly, as a fact delivered with some care. "Hearthstone, or the next one. Different name. Better terms of service, buried deeper. They'll find another angle." Robert thought about that.
"Probably," he said. "So why do this?"
Robert considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because Sophie asked me who it was for, he said, and I didn't have an answer. And I'd rather have an answer. Raphael nodded slowly, the specific nod of a person calibrating how much to believe in something. He put on his coat and left. He submitted the opt-out request the next morning. Alone at first. It took 4 minutes through the community app, and then a confirmation email arrived from Hearthstone with the subject line, "We're sorry to hear this," and a series of photographs of Sycamore Glen in different seasons, golden and orderly and glowing, with text that said the drones existed to protect the community experience he had invested in. He closed the email without reading past the first paragraph and went downstairs to make coffee. He was at the kitchen window when the drone appeared. It was lower than usual, hovering at roughly window height, its amber light burning steadily. He stared at it. It stared if a device without eyes can be said to stare back. He raised his coffee mug. It returned to its circuit. He wasn't naive about what this meant. Joni's letter to the AG's office would take months and might go nowhere. The journalism angle might die in an editor's queue. 11 households opting out of drone coverage was, in the algorithmic mathematics of Hearthstone's business model, approximately a rounding error. Nothing he'd set in motion was going to dismantle the machine. He knew that the way you know most true things, not with triumph, but with a dull, grounding weight of fact. But something had changed in him that he couldn't quite undo, and he wasn't trying to. He'd learned to see the neighborhood clearly, not the photograph they'd sold him, with its warm light and its managed silences, but the actual thing, messy and various and requiring attention. The Cabreras' grandmother crocheting on the porch. Phil Ostrowski's lawn spiraling outward in creative concentric arcs. Sophie and Maya's rope, strung between trees, obeying the physics of a game no one had invented before and no algorithm had approved. The drone would be back. The form of the problem would persist. He went to the backyard shed, found Sophie's rope where it had been sitting coiled since December, and strung it between the two sycamores himself. He'd need to get the bucket from inside. He didn't know the rules of the game. He'd have to ask Sophie to teach him, and the thought of that, the specific thought of sitting in the cold April grass while his daughter explained the rules of something she'd invented, made something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized had been clenched. The drone appeared at the fence line within 6 minutes. He watched it come. "Good morning, Mr. Calloway. A reminder that the Sycamore Glen backyard guidelines? I've submitted an opt-out request," he said. Reference number 447 Delta. "It's in processing." A pause. The drones weren't designed for pauses. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. "Thank you for that information, Mr. Calloway. Please note that until your opt-out is confirmed, community guidelines remain applicable and—" "I know," he said. The drone's light pulsed. It held its position for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then it lifted, smoothly, and returned to its circuit above the fence line, where it continued its slow patrol, watching, recording, waiting for the next deviation from a standard that someone else had set, for reasons Robert now understood, in a neighborhood that had been built to make forgetting those reasons very easy. He went inside to get the bucket. He called up the stairs for Sophie. He heard her feet on the floor above him, and then on the stairs. And then she was in the kitchen in her weekend socks, looking at him with the wariness children carry when a parent has been behaving in ways that require interpretation. "I strung your rope," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "You need to teach me the game," he said. She assessed this. The wary look didn't disappear entirely. She was 11, and 11-year-olds remember everything, but something shifted behind it, some small recalculation. She grabbed her jacket off the hook by the door. "It's complicated," she said. "I've got time," he said. She went out the back door into the cold April morning, and he followed her. And the drone made its slow circle above the fence, amber light pulsing in the thin spring air, and the rope hung between the sycamores, and his daughter began to explain something. Robert Calloway learned what most of us learn too late and forget too quickly. That order is always someone's product, and the question worth asking is not whether the world is tidy, but who profits from the tidying. The drones of Sycamore Glen will continue their circuits tonight, tomorrow, in subdivision after subdivision across 43 acres of former soybean field and 10,000 other places like it. They will flag the unauthorized, the imprecise, the simply human. They will do so gently, cheerfully at $47 a month. What they cannot flag, what no algorithm has yet been written to detect, is a man standing in a cold yard, learning the rules of a game he didn't invent. In the twilight zone, freedom rarely arrives as revelation. It arrives as a rope between two trees and the willingness to ask your daughter how it works.